Settle in now if you like and let the day grow softer around you. There is nowhere you need to be for the next while and nothing you need to hold tightly in your mind. Just let the room become a little quieter and allow your attention to rest. Tonight we are going to wander through the legendary places of Egypt, not in any hurried way, but as though we are following a calm river at dusk. Temples, tombs, sacred hills, old cities, and names that still seem to carry the echo of another world. Some of these places are real and still standing in one form or another. Some are known through ancient stories, and some are remembered because people kept returning to them in their imagination. If you enjoy these slow evening journeys, you can like the video, subscribe, or leave a gentle comment, perhaps with where you are listening from tonight, or what quiet subject you would like to drift into next. For now, though, let the lamps in your mind be low. Let the pace be unhurried. Let Egypt appear not as a lesson to master, but as a landscape to rest within, with sand, stone, river water, and long memory opening slowly in the dark. And so we begin with the oldest feeling of all, the sense that a place can outlast a lifetime and still feel close enough to touch. If you try to imagine Egypt at the beginning of its long story, it helps to begin with the river. The Nile is not only a river in the ordinary sense, but a kind of patient line drawn through the desert. It gathers life, then carries it forward, season after season, century after century. So many legendary places in Egypt begin there because so much of Egyptian life began there. The river helped shape where people settled, where they planted, where they buried the dead, and where they imagined the borders between the human world and the divine one. In a hot land where the edges of the desert could feel absolute, the river made a green path. It made passage possible. It made memory possible too. When you read ancient stories about Egypt, one of the first things you notice is how deeply place matters. A temple is not only a building. It is a point where the world is believed to thin, where the gods might be honored, where words and offerings and rituals could keep the order of things steady. A tomb is not only a chamber for the dead. It is a carefully arranged continuation, a place designed for passage, protection, and remembrance. And then there are the legendary places that sit somewhere between geography and story. A city may be described by its walls, but also by the gods said to favor it. A mountain may be only stone, and yet also the place where the sun rises in a particular sacred way. A ruined temple may stand silent now, but in older time it would have been alive with painted color, carved names, incense, ritual movement, and the ordinary footsteps of priests and workers. There is something calming in that, perhaps, not the grandeur alone, but the sense of use. These places were not only admired, they were inhabited by ceremony, by care, by repetition. A beautiful place can become even more beautiful when you imagine the people who return to it each day, each month, each year, with hands full of offerings and minds full of expectation. One of the oldest and most famous Egyptian places of legend is not a place of mystery in the modern sense. It is a place of astonishing human intention. The Great Pyramid at Giza rises from the desert with a kind of quiet confidence. Even now, after so much time, it feels like a sentence spoken in stone. It is the largest of the pyramids, and it has stood for thousands of years, which is almost difficult to understand in an ordinary way. People were already ancient when it was young, and yet even the Great Pyramid is not a solitary object. It belongs to a landscape of other tombs, subsidiary structures, causeways, boats, and monuments. Giza is a place of arrangement. It is not just one monument, but a whole idea made visible. The plateau itself has become legendary because it holds the memory of power, the afterlife, technical skill, and the desire to make permanence from difficult materials. A traveler arriving there long ago might have seen a desert edge filled with geometry and shadow. A modern visitor sees the same broad forms, though some of the polish is gone and some of the original color has faded away. But the feeling remains. The place still asks for quiet. It still seems to encourage slow looking. Nearby, the Sphinx waits in a very different mood. It is smaller than the pyramid in height, but not in presence. The face, worn by weather and time, seems to belong to a creature that has chosen patience over motion. It watches the horizon. It watches the passage of years. People have long attached questions to it, and stories and speculations, yet there is something restful in the fact that a figure can become so familiar and still resist complete explanation. Ancient Egypt is full of such places. Some are monumental, some are hidden in cliff faces, some are carved into mountain walls, and some are no more than remembered names in old texts. Together they form a landscape where belief and building were often the same act. To make a temple was to make a statement. To align a chamber with the sun was to honor the sky. To place a tomb beneath the ground was to trust that the dead still belonged to the order of the living world. And in that quiet logic, we begin to feel the first shape of Egyptian legendary places. They are not random wonders. They are meaningful spaces, each with its own role in the long conversation between earth, river, stone, and the unseen. It is easy to speak of Giza as though it were only a set of famous monuments, but the site is richer than that. It is a whole complex of thought, labor, and memory. The pyramids do not stand alone in the imagination of ancient Egypt. They are tied to mastabas, to burial chambers, to processional routes, and to the necropolis itself, the city of the dead. The word necropolis sounds severe, but it also tells the truth. There was a civic quality to the afterlife landscape. The dead were not hidden away in a way that suggested abandonment. They were placed within a managed, sacred geography. Stone, corridor, and chamber all worked together to support continued existence. At Giza, the west bank of the Nile mattered. The sun setting in the west gave the direction symbolic weight. To place tombs on that side of the river was to place them where day ends, where the sky cools, where the journey turns inward. This is the kind of detail that can feel very small at first, and then, when you sit with it, it becomes large. Geography and theology are meeting in the same place. People often ask how such structures could have been built. The question is natural, and it still has a practical edge, but in a bedtime hour it can also be felt as admiration. The Egyptians did not build because they had too much time and nothing to do. They built because they had an enduring idea of order, kingship, and the afterlife. They built because many hands could be organized into a single purpose. They built because stone, once moved, can hold a memory for a very long time. And then there is the more human side, the one sometimes softened in grand retellings. Quarry workers, haulers, planners, scribes, overseers, cooks, water carriers, and craftsmen all belong to the story. A legendary place is not made by legend alone. It is made by daily effort, by food and rest, by measurement and repetition, by the quiet accumulation of skill. It is worth pausing with that for a moment. The story of Egypt is often told with a strong emphasis on kings and gods, but the places themselves also remember ordinary people. The workers who cut stones, the people who painted surfaces, the hands that mixed pigments, the eyes that checked an alignment, the families who brought provisions. These unseen lives are part of the calm weight of the place. If you were standing there at sunset, perhaps the stones would turn more golden and the shadows would stretch longer between the blocks. The air would begin to soften. The desert would hold heat a little while longer, but the sky would take on the first blue of evening. In that light, Giza can feel less like a monument and more like a threshold. Not a doorway exactly, but a pause in the landscape. That feeling of threshold appears again and again in Egyptian sacred places. Temples are thresholds, tombs are thresholds. Even a road through the desert can become one if it is believed to lead toward a sacred site. The ancient Egyptians lived with many such boundaries, and they learned to mark them carefully. Among all these places, the pyramids have perhaps become the most universal symbol, yet in Egypt itself they are only one part of a much broader sacred world. There are valleys, cliffs, island temples, burial grounds, sacred lakes, and cities devoted to particular gods. The legendary map is larger than we often imagine. And so, as we continue, it may help to think not only of famous ruins, but of a network of places, each one linked to belief, each one carrying some piece of the old Egyptian understanding that a place can be alive with intention long after the builders are gone. Egyptian temples are among the most evocative places in the world, partly because they were never simply decorative. They were functional in the deepest ceremonial sense. They held ritual, procession, offering, and sacred memory. Their walls were often covered with carvings, their columns with capitals shaped like plants, and their inner halls with controlled darkness. A temple in Egypt could be monumental and yet intimate at the same time. The outer walls might impress from far away, but deeper inside the spaces could narrow, darken, and grow still. The architecture itself helped shape the feeling of the sacred. It was a slow descent from bright exterior to dim interior, from open courtyard to enclosed chamber, from common daylight to a place reserved for gods, priests, and ceremony. Karnak is one of the great names here, a vast temple complex that grew over time as many rulers added to it. It was not built all at once, which makes it feel almost organic in a strange and beautiful way. Generations laid down pylons, columns, sanctuaries, and processional routes. It became a kind of sacred city within a city, devoted especially to Ammon and linked with Thebes, another of Egypt's great legendary centers. The scale of Karnak is difficult to hold in the mind at once. Some places impress because they are neat and unified. Karnak impresses because it is layered. It contains time inside itself. It records the ambitions of different reigns, and it does so in stone. Even broken columns and fallen fragments can feel eloquent there, because the whole site still communicates the basic Egyptian sense that sacred space is made over long periods, with repeated care. Luxor Temple, not far away, offers a different mood. It feels more immediate in some ways, more directly tied to the river and to ceremonial movement. It is one of those places where you can imagine processions passing in measured steps, where the sound of sandals and chanting might once have filled the air. Today it stands partly in ruins and partly restored, with a dignity that does not depend on perfection. One of the calming things about these temples is the consistency of their symbols. Lotus and papyrus appear often, as do images of kings presenting offerings, scenes of divine encounter, and inscriptions that seem to braid art with prayer. The temples were not built to be empty shells. They were built to receive life in ritual form, and yet, even now in silence, they seem to listen. That is perhaps why they appear so often in conversations about legendary places. They are not only relics, they are places that continue to suggest ceremony even when the ceremony has ended. A columned hall in the fading light can feel almost like an instrument waiting for the hand to return. A carved wall can feel like it is holding its breath. In Upper Egypt especially, the river carved a long corridor of life between desert cliffs. Temples often rose in relation to this line, as though the Nile itself were a guiding thread through a much larger tapestry. The riverbank was not only practical, it was symbolic. It connected settlements, transport, agriculture, and sacred movement. Some temples were associated with specific gods, and the identities of those gods shaped the feel of the places. A temple dedicated to Hathor, for example, might carry a gentler mood, with associations of music, love, joy, and motherhood. A temple tied to Horus might feel more protective, more linked to kingship and the sky. A place connected to Osiris brings a different calm, because Osiris is deeply bound to death, renewal, and the hope that life continues in some transformed way. If you move through these divine associations slowly without trying to memorize them, they begin to feel like currents rather than categories. Egyptian places were often places of relationship. They connected gods to landscapes, rulers to legitimacy, the dead to the living, and the seasonal river to human survival. And because so much of this world was arranged through repetition, the temples can feel strangely restful to imagine. Offerings were given, incense was burned, words were spoken. Water was poured, the rhythm mattered. The gods were not only believed in, they were maintained through regular attention. At night, when the mind is loosening its grip on the day, this idea can be especially soothing. a world held together by repeated gestures, by steady return, by the simple dignity of care. Egyptian temples, in their stone stillness, preserve that feeling very well. So we continue past colonnades and sacred courts toward another kind of place, one more secluded, more personal, and often more mysterious: the tombs of Egypt. If the pyramids are the grand public statement of Egyptian burial culture, then the Valley of the Kings feels like a more hidden sentence. It lies on the west bank near Thebes, tucked among desert cliffs and dry channels, and it became the burial place of many New Kingdom pharaohs. The valley is not lush. It is austere, angular, and sun-baked, but that austerity is part of its power. The choice of the valley reflects both practicality and symbolism. The cliffs offer concealment, the desert offers distance from the living city, and the west, again, carries its old association with the setting sun and the realm of the dead. Egyptian burial sites were never casual. They were arranged with thought, with orientation, and with a strong desire to protect the body and the name of the deceased. The tombs themselves vary, but many of them share a sense of inward journey. Corridors descend or turn, chambers open one after another, walls bloom with painted scenes of gods, spells, and underworld imagery. A tomb was not just a storage place. It was a map for survival, a carefully prepared route through the unknown. Tutankhamun's tomb, discovered in the 20th century, has made the Valley of the Kings famous to people far beyond the field of archaeology. But even beyond that one discovery, the valley remains one of the most compelling places in all of Egypt because it combines archaeological drama with spiritual intention. The tombs were made for eternity, but they were also subject to theft, flooding, damage, and time. That tension gives the site a quiet poignancy. To think of the valley at dusk is to think of stillness layered on stillness. The cliffs hold the heat of the day for a while, then gradually release it. Wind moves dust across the open ground. The entrances to the tombs, often simple from the outside, lead into elaborate interiors. There is a kind of humility in that contrast. The exterior is plain, the interior is rich with meaning, and the paintings where they survive are extraordinary. Deep reds, yellows, blues, and blacks once filled the walls. Figures of gods and guardians stand in measured positions. Texts guide the dead. The scenes are not random decoration, they are theological tools. They help the deceased move, remember, and endure. It can be comforting to imagine the tomb builders working slowly, knowing that their labor would likely never be seen by most people. Their craftsmanship was hidden on purpose. The outer world might remember a king. The inner chambers remembered the king more intimately, through names, images, and spells. There is also something moving about the fact that many tombs were reused, altered, or robbed in antiquity. Human beings have always responded to valuable, secluded places with curiosity. The valley is therefore not just a record of burial, but a record of longing, intrusion, and preservation. It tells us that even when a place is meant to remain sealed, the world keeps finding ways to open it again. Still, for all that, the valley preserves its atmosphere. It is not loud, it is not triumphant, it is a place of deep interiority. The rock, the dust, the painted passageways, and the old names all work together to create one of the most memorable landscapes in ancient history. And if the Valley of the Kings represents royal burial, there are other Egyptian places that speak more directly of the journey after death itself, of judgment, transformation, and the hope of renewal. Some of those places are not physical in the ordinary sense at all. They exist in belief, in text, and in the imagination of those who read the old funerary books. Yet even imagined places can become legendary. In Egypt, they often did. Abydos is one of those ancient places that seems to gather many layers of meaning at once. It was an important cult center, especially associated with Osiris, and for a long time it held a place of deep religious significance in Egyptian belief. People made pilgrimages there, or at least aspired to be connected with it, because it was linked with death, resurrection, and divine kingship. The fascination of Abydos comes partly from the way it joins the human and the mythic. It is a real archaeological site, with temples, cemeteries, and traces of long use, but it is also the place where stories about Osiris feel especially close. Osiris, dismembered and restored, became one of the most important figures in Egyptian religion, embodying the possibility that death need not be the final word. That idea alone could make Abydos feel tender and quiet, a place where loss is not erased but transformed. A place where the dead are remembered not as absent, but as part of a continuing order. In ancient Egypt, the afterlife was not a vague abstraction. It was imagined with remarkable detail, and places like Abydos helped anchor those imaginations in the landscape. There is a temple at Abydos associated with Seti I that remains especially admired. Its carved reliefs are among the finest in Egypt, and the site is often spoken of with reverence by those who visit it. Yet even without technical praise, the atmosphere of Abydos can be felt. It is one of those places that seems to ask for slow attention rather than quick summary. Another striking feature of Abydos is the presence of the Osirian, an enigmatic structure often discussed for its heavy stone architecture and its symbolic relationship to Osiris. It feels older than it looks, and older than its own formal name, which adds to the sense that the site contains layers of remembrance that are not easily separated. Places like Abydos remind us that Egyptian legendary geography is not just about kings and pyramids. It is also about devotion, mourning, restoration, and ritual return. A pilgrim did not come only to admire stone. They came to participate in meaning. To stand there was to stand inside a story already in motion. That is one reason such places continue to attract curiosity. They are not only old, they are emotionally legible. Even now, without knowing every detail, a listener can feel what Abydos is about. A sacred center, a place of return, a place where the dead are not forgotten and where the god of renewal is honored in stone and silence. If Giza speaks of monumental permanence, Abydos speaks of continuity through transformation. The difference is subtle but important. One feels like an assertion, the other feels like a prayer. Thebes, known today largely through its ruins and the ancient names preserved around them, was once one of the great capitals of Egypt. It was a city of power, but also a city of sacred pathways. The relationship between its major temples, especially Karnak and Luxor, helped create a ceremonial geography that still feels vivid today. One of the most beautiful ideas in Thebes is that of the procession. Sacred statues did not remain static within their sanctuaries forever. They could be carried, in carefully ordered rites, along routes that linked one temple to another. Festivals transformed the city into a moving sacred network. The river, the streets, the temples, and the people all participated in the rhythm. This is a comforting image if you let it be. A city not defined only by walls or markets but by recurring ritual movement. In festival times, the boundary between temple and city would soften. The divine would move outward. The people would gather. Boats, banners, music, and ceremony would shape the air. Thebes mattered not only because it was rich or politically important, but because it was spiritually central. The god Ammon became especially significant there, and the great temples linked to Ammon developed into vast, evolving complexes. Over time, Thebes became one of the clearest examples of how religion and urban life could intertwine. Even the surrounding landscape contributed to the feeling. On one side of the river, the land of the living. On the other, the land of the dead. Between them, water. That simple arrangement created a symbolic map that ancient Egyptians could read intuitively. Life, death, movement, return. The city itself seemed to rest on those ideas. It is also worth remembering that Thebes was not only for priests and kings. Craftspeople, laborers, administrators, households, and travelers all lived within or near this broader world. The famous village of Deir el-Medina, home to the workers who built royal tombs, gives us a particularly rich sense of the human scale of Egyptian life. These were people who understood sacred work not as a distant concept, but as a daily discipline. They left behind letters, records, and traces of ordinary concern. They spoke of food, quarrels, illness, family, and work. And because of them, we can feel that Egyptian legendary places were not isolated monuments, but part of a living society. The temples and tombs depended on people whose names were not always meant to endure, yet some of them did. The workers' village itself feels legendary in a quieter way, not because it is grand, but because it gives texture to the world behind the grand things. A street of small houses, a bread maker, a scribe at his work, a family waiting for the return of a laborer from the valley. These scenes soften the ancient world into something intimate and human, and perhaps this is another kind of legendary place. Not only the monumental, but the human-scale spaces that supported the monumental. A village, a storehouse, a workshop, a quay on the river, places that rarely make the front of a history book, but without which no temple or tomb could have existed. Thebes, in this wider sense, was a whole ecology of sacred life. Its roads carried not just people but meanings. Its festivals gave form to devotion. Its riverbank held the dead. Its temples faced the changing light, and its memory remains one of the strongest in all of ancient Egypt. We can drift now toward a different kind of legendary place, one that brings together healing, sacred water, and the quiet hope of restoration. Some Egyptian temples were famous not only for their gods, but for their association with health, wisdom, or miraculous help. In a world that often seems severe from a distance, those gentler associations matter. Ancient Egypt was a civilization of immense religious complexity, and some of its places carried reputations for healing or protection. These were not hospitals in the modern sense, of course, but sacred spaces where one might go to ask for relief, guidance, or blessing. The idea that a place could support the body by engaging the divine was deeply woven into Egyptian thought. Temples associated with Imhotep, for example, later became known for healing traditions. Imhotep himself, remembered as a gifted figure of learning and practical skill, became a kind of cultural bridge between human expertise and divine association. He shows how easily the Egyptians could honor both knowledge and sanctity in the same breath. Sacred pools, temple lakes, and ritual water also mattered greatly. Water did not only refresh the body, it purified the space. It marked transitions. It could be part of cleansing rites, offerings, and the symbolic renewal that underlay many ceremonies. In a dry land, water naturally gained deeper significance, but in Egypt that significance became fully integrated into religious practice. Even the layout of temples could encourage a sense of healing calm. Courtyards opened to sky. Colonnades provided rhythm and shade. Inner sanctuaries suggested retreat and stillness. The architecture itself guided attention away from distraction and toward focus. If a person came seeking favor from a god, the surroundings were already preparing them for the experience. There is a lesson here, perhaps, that the ancient Egyptians understood instinctively. A place can affect the mind by shaping the body's movement through it. The path you take, the light you encounter, the sounds you hear, the space you pause in, all of these alter the pace of thought. That is as true now as it was then. Some healing places were dedicated to deities like Sekhmet, a powerful and complex goddess often linked with both danger and protection. Her fierce aspect could be feared, but it could also be approached through ritual to gain safety from illness or imbalance. In Egypt, a god or goddess was rarely only one thing. The divine world was full of layered powers, and sacred places reflected that complexity. To imagine an Egyptian healing temple at night is to imagine a controlled quiet. Lamps perhaps, though not too many, a low murmur of voices, water in a basin, the smell of resin or incense, stone surfaces holding the coolness of evening. These sensory details do not demand attention, but they help a place become tangible. And because the Egyptians were so attentive to balance, their sacred spaces often feel like places where the world is temporarily organized against disorder. That may be one reason they remain appealing in memory. We are drawn to places where the scattered parts of life seem, for a moment, to be gathered together. There are also places in Egypt that are legendary not because of healing or kingship, but because of their association with learning. The ancient world valued libraries, scribal traditions, and the preservation of names. In a civilization where writing carried such authority, written places themselves could become almost sacred. So now we move gently toward the intellectual heart of the old Egyptian world, where papyrus, ink, and careful record-keeping helped sustain the memory of an entire civilization. The places of knowledge are often quieter than the places of conquest, but they can last just as long in the imagination. When people think of Egypt, they often think first of stone, but writing is equally important. The hieroglyphs carved on temples and tombs are not simply decorative, they are essential to how the places work. A name written on stone could preserve identity. A spell written on a wall could guide a soul. An offering formula could sustain ritual purpose. This means that Egyptian legendary places are also written places. The walls speak in a sense because the language matters as much as the structure. The signs are beautiful, certainly, but they are also functional. They belong to a civilization that understood writing as an active force. Scribes occupied a special place in this world. They were not always lavishly celebrated in the way kings were, but they carried important authority because they could read, write, count, and record. The work of the scribe allowed land to be managed, offerings to be listed, tomb texts to be copied, and temple resources to be organized. Without the scribal tradition, many of Egypt's legendary places would have been much harder to remember. There is a quiet beauty in imagining a scribe seated with papyrus and ink, the world of stone and ceremony around him depending in part on the thin reed of a brush. So much of what survives from ancient Egypt comes through writing. Names of rulers, hymns to gods, instructions for the dead, records of labor, letters between people, and the occasional complaint or small domestic message. These fragments bring breath into the ruins. And when we speak of libraries or archives in the ancient Egyptian context, we are speaking not of one singular famous building alone, but of a broader culture of preservation. Temple archives held texts. Scriptoria and workspaces supported copying. The effort to keep words intact across time was a sacred effort in its own right. This matters because memory in Egypt was never just personal. It was civic, religious, and cosmic. To forget a name was dangerous. To preserve it was to assist survival. That is why temples, tombs, statues, and inscriptions all work together. They are all methods of memory. One can feel this especially in the names of places themselves. Thebes, Abydos, Giza, Memphis, Philae, Edfu, each one now carries a weight that is partly historical and partly imaginative. Even when the physical site is reduced, the name can still open a whole atmosphere. Memphis, for example, was once a great capital, now less visible in the public imagination than Giza or Luxor, but once enormously important. It stood near the apex of political and administrative life for long stretches of Egypt's history. Today its remains are more modest in appearance, yet its significance remains large. This is often true in Egypt. The visible ruin does not always match the scale of the old importance. That mismatch can be strangely restful to consider. It reminds us that a place may have been immense even when only traces remain. The world is full of such quiet disproportions. A low wall may mark a lost city. A broken statue may have belonged to a vast complex. A fragment of text may preserve an entire theological vision. From the standpoint of bedtime listening, this is a lovely kind of thought. Not everything needs to be seen all at once. Not everything needs to be complete to be real. The ancient Egyptians, in their own way, seem to understand that too. They built for what could endure, but they also trusted in traces. And so we wander onward, from the written chamber to another place of slow fascination, one that sits closer to the edge of the inhabited world, where cliffs, quarries, and border temples gave Egypt a sense of expansion and frontier. Legendary places are not always central. Sometimes their power comes from the edge. Egypt's borders were not only lines on a map. They were lived spaces, often marked by forts, quarry sites, shrines, and routes through difficult terrain. To think about legendary places in Egypt is to think not only of central temples and royal tombs, but also of the edges where stone was taken from the earth and where trade, defense, and ritual all intersected. Quarries themselves can be unexpectedly evocative. They are places of extraction, certainly, but they are also places where monumental history begins. Before a column rises, before a statue is carved, before a temple wall is lined, the stone must come from somewhere. In Egypt, the landscape yielded limestone, sandstone, granite, and other materials that would be transformed into sacred architecture. The quarry is often imagined as purely utilitarian, but there is a legendary dimension to it as well. A quarry can become part of the story if the stone from a particular place was prized, or if the site was linked with royal building projects, or if the sheer effort of moving enormous blocks through harsh terrain becomes part of the civilization's identity. The border temples and forts, meanwhile, remind us that Egypt was never sealed off from the wider world. It interacted with Nubia, the Levant, the Mediterranean, and the Red Sea networks beyond. These places at the edge are therefore not minor. They are where exchange happened, where influence crossed, and where the state made its presence felt. The temples near the southern frontier often have a special beauty because they seem to hold both permanence and exposure. A temple at the edge of the empire says something different from one at the center. It says that belief extends outward. It says that sacred order can be claimed even in harder terrain. The same can be said of the Red Sea routes. Though not always discussed as legendary places in the popular sense, they were deeply important in Egyptian imagination because they connected Egypt with distant lands and exotic goods. Incense, oils, metals, and materials traveled through these channels. The idea of the faraway was not abstract. It was part of the economic and ceremonial life of the country. Sometimes a legendary place is legendary because it stands at the point where the known world thins. A desert road, a harbour, a mountain pass, a watch station, or a border shrine can all acquire that feeling. They become places of transition. And transition in ancient Egypt was one of the most powerful ideas of all. There is also a deep quiet in frontier places. Less density, more space, more wind, more visibility of horizon. If you imagine a small outpost at evening, with the sun dropping low over the sand or rock, the entire scene can feel suspended. The heart of Egypt was always connected to such edges because the civilization needed them in order to define itself. And so the story does not end at the center. It spreads outward. The river, the temple, the tomb, the quarry, the fortress, the route, the border shrine. All of these belong to the same broad legendary world. There is a particular kind of beauty in an Egyptian ruin. It is not the beauty of collapse alone. It is the beauty of persistence. Many structures still keep enough of their original form that you can read them as architecture, even when roofs are gone and colors have faded. Columns remain, doorways remain, reliefs remain. The site keeps its grammar even after much of the sentence has broken away. This is part of why Egypt has such enduring appeal. The past is not completely gone there. It is legible in fragments. A traveler can stand among fallen blocks and still feel the intended shape of the place. A temple courtyard can still suggest its former enclosure. A tomb wall can still speak through a line of figures or a surviving inscription. And because Egypt was so focused on order, symmetry, repetition, and symbolic arrangement, its ruins often hold together especially well in the imagination. Even a damaged column suggests the whole. Even a broken statue hints at the presence that once animated the site. The eye completes what time has removed. There is comfort in that too. Not all things need to be whole to be meaningful. Egypt's ruins teach this quietly. They are incomplete, and yet they continue to work on the mind. They offer proportion, rhythm, and an old sense of purpose. Some of the most striking ruins are those that once stood in places now lightly inhabited or surrounded by open land. A temple beside the river, a cluster of stones rising from fields, a a desert path leading to a tomb. These landscapes resist the modern habit of crowding everything together. They allow emptiness to frame the ancient work. In a bedtime mood, emptiness is not lack. It is space for the mind to settle. If you think of the temples at Philae, for instance, you encounter another layer of legendary place. Philae was associated especially with Isis, and the island setting gave it a strong sense of separation and sanctity. Islands in Egypt could be charged with symbolic significance because water creates a natural boundary. To reach such a place is already to have crossed into a different register of experience. Philae remained important for a very long time, extending well into later periods, which shows how strongly certain places can continue beyond their original historical moment. Sacred sites often outlive the political structures that first supported them. Devotion can be remarkably durable. The same is true in another way of names attached to old places. Even when a building is gone, the name can survive in scholarship, in tourism, in memory, in literature. The name becomes a vessel. It holds the shape of the place after the stone has changed. And perhaps that is the hidden generosity of ruins. They invite us to complete them not with certainty, but with attention. They ask us to be patient. They reward slow looking. They allow the ancient world to remain partially open, like a book left gently on a table. Egyptian legendary places are often treated as if they were all about scale, but the longer you linger, the more you notice the smaller details. A painted eye, a cut in the stone, a reused block, a narrow stair, a chipped inscription. These details make the places feel less distant and more human. So we continue softly through a few more remembered landscapes, each one adding a different tone to the larger whole. There is no need to hurry. Egypt itself stretches time beautifully. Water in Egypt is never just water. It is life, boundary, purification, transport, and symbol all at once. Rivers and lakes shaped the nation's settlements, but they also shaped its holy places. Some of the most memorable sacred sites are linked to islands, pools, or river crossings, and that relationship gives them a special stillness. An island temple feels different from a temple on open ground. The water around it slows the approach. It separates the place without isolating it completely. That mild distance can deepen the sense that the site belongs to another order. In the case of Philae, the island setting contributed strongly to its atmosphere. Visitors had to approach by water, and that change of pace mattered. Lakes associated with temples also created symbolic clarity. Water reflects sky. Water cools the surrounding air. Water can be purified, poured, and ritually handled. Sacred lakes were sometimes part of temple complexes where priests performed cleansing rites before entering the more restricted inner spaces. There is something quietly reassuring about these waters. They do not need to be dramatic to be important. They simply support the order of things. In a civilization so attentive to cosmic balance, water became one of the clearest images of sustained life. Even the Nile's annual cycles once shaped the rhythm of expectation in ways that modern readers may find hard to fully feel. Flooding, receding, planting, harvesting, transport, ritual. The river was a calendar in motion. To live beside it was to live by a pattern that combined reliability with change. Some Egyptian legends also speak of primal waters, the watery chaos from which the world emerged in mythic time. In that sense, water was not only practical but cosmological. The sacred places near water therefore carried both earthly and cosmic significance. They stood at the meeting point of daily life and ancient story. Imagine for a moment a temple reflected in evening water. The stone becomes doubled, the sky darkens, the outlines blur slightly in the current. It is a beautiful image because it suggests both stability and movement. The temple remains, and yet the reflection shifts. That too feels Egyptian in some deep way. Persistence and change together. A great many legendary places are made more memorable by this kind of doubling. The real structure and the reflected or imagined one, the tomb and the hoped-for afterlife, the city and the divine version of the city. The river and the mythic river. Egypt seems comfortable with such layered realities, and if one is listening at night, the water imagery may be especially restful. It slows the breathing, it softens the mental edges, it offers a plain, repeated motion that the mind can settle into. Egyptian statues can feel deeply human even when they are enormous. Perhaps it is because many of them were intended to embody presence rather than merely to decorate a space. A statue was not always just an image. It could act as a focus for reverence, memory, or divine inhabitation. The Colossi of Memnon are an especially famous example. These great seated statues once stood at the entrance to a temple complex and became known in later antiquity for a curious sound reportedly heard at dawn, which added to their legend. Even without that story, they would still be striking. Their scale alone suggests a civilization comfortable with making stone figures that seem almost to watch the horizon. There is something restful about statue faces, especially in Egyptian art, because they so often express stillness rather than dramatic emotion. A calm gaze, a fixed posture, a sense of inward continuity. The statue does not rush to speak, it simply remains. That can feel almost companionable late at night. Many temple and funerary statues were created to preserve identity in durable form. The materials could vary from limestone to granite to basalt, and the workmanship ranged from monumental to delicate. But the basic intention was often similar: to keep someone present, to create a body for memory. Even a damaged statue retains some of that effect. The broken nose, the worn cheek, the missing arm, the surface polished by centuries of wind or handling. Damage becomes part of the biography of the object. It does not erase its mood. In some cases, it deepens it. Statues also help us imagine how colorful ancient Egypt once was. Modern visitors often encounter stone surfaces that seem muted, but the original world was brighter. Paint, gilding, pigments, and inlays once changed the appearance of many sacred objects and buildings. What now feels austere was often once vivid. That fact can be difficult to hold in the mind, yet it adds richness to the ruins. A legendary place in Egypt often included a face of some kind. A colossus, a sphinx, a king's relief, a god's image, a painted guardian. These faces anchored the place emotionally. They gave it a point of presence. They suggested that someone or something was watching over the site. And if you imagine the face not as an object to be solved, but as a companion to silence, the mood changes. The monument becomes less about dominance and more about endurance. It has outlived the procession, the power, the ceremony, and still it waits. This is one reason so many people return to Egyptian sites in thought. They seem to gather time rather than lose it. They become patient witnesses. The world changes around them, but they continue to offer a recognizable shape. From statues, it is a short and gentle step to the places where figures were carved into cliffs, rather than raised freestanding in open air. Egypt's rock-cut sanctuaries create an entirely different feeling, one of entering the stone itself. Some of Egypt's most extraordinary legendary places were not built outward, but inward. Rock-cut temples and tombs carved directly into cliffs or mountainsides suggest a different relationship with stone. Instead of stacking blocks into place, the builders shape the living rock into sacred form. The effect can be remarkable. Abu Simbel is one of the most famous examples, and for good reason. The great statues at its facade create an unforgettable impression, but the temple is more than its exterior. Its alignment, its interior chambers, and its later rescue during the construction of the Aswan High Dam have all contributed to its modern fame. Still, at the heart of the site is the simple and powerful idea of carving monumentality into the cliff. A rock-cut place has a slightly different mood from a freestanding temple. It feels anchored. It feels sheltered by the mountain itself. The rock becomes both material and setting. The entrance is dramatic, but the interior often narrows into increasing intimacy, giving the sense of passing from the outer world into something more protected. Elsewhere in Egypt, Cliff tombs and chapels used the same principle in smaller or more local forms. The geography of the valley walls becomes part of the sacred design. Light and shadow shape the experience as much as carved detail does. At certain hours, the sun touches the entrance just so, and the stone seems to wake briefly before settling again into shadow. This combination of rock and ritual makes the places feel lasting. They are not easily moved. They are part of the earth and yet shaped by human will. That balance between natural solidity and deliberate carving may be one of the reasons such sites feel so peaceful to contemplate. The rescue of Abu Simbel in the 20th century also speaks to the continuing value placed on these ancient places. The temple was physically cut apart and moved to save it from flooding, a vast effort of modern engineering in service of ancient memory. Few stories better show how a legendary place can continue to matter long after its original moment has passed. There is something almost ceremonial about that rescue too. It feels as though a later age briefly adopted the older Egyptian practice of careful preservation, though with cranes and calculations instead of chisels and ropes. In both cases, the goal was the same: to keep the place intact if possible, to let it remain visible. When you stand before a cliff temple, you can sense how humans have always tried to converse with stone, sometimes by adding to it, sometimes by cutting into it, sometimes by naming it. Egypt contains examples of all of these, and the result is a landscape full of relationship. And relationship, in the end, is what makes the places legendary. Not only size, not only age. The sense that a place was made to speak with gods, with kings, with the dead, with the sun, with the river, and with the generations yet to come. We are nearing the slower edges of the map now, where the legendary and the historical become almost inseparable. Some places survive because they were powerful, some survive because they were beautiful, some survive because later people kept telling stories about them. Often in Egypt it is all three. It can be helpful every now and then to remember that the legendary places of Egypt are not all the ones that appear most often in guidebooks. Some are less prominent today, though they were important in their own time. Some survive in fragments, in inscriptions, or in the memory of rituals. Some are known because of mythology, some because of archaeology, some because a single remarkable feature made them unforgettable. There are sacred islands, old cemeteries, forgotten processional roads, worker settlements, pyramid fields beyond the most famous ones, and city sites whose names still survive in scholarship though the neighborhoods have changed beyond recognition. Each adds a small piece to the broader picture. The more you look, the more Egyptian space becomes a web rather than a list. A site is linked to a god, which is linked to a festival, which is linked to a river crossing, which is linked to a city, which is linked to a tomb, which is linked to an ancestor, and so on. The relationships matter. The legendary quality often lives in the connections between places as much as in the places themselves. This is why a bedtime journey through Egypt can move so gently from one scene to another without feeling abrupt. The civilization itself was woven from continuity. Repetition was not boredom, it was structure. A return to a temple, a return of a festival, a return to an ancestral name, a return to the river's flood. The old world took comfort in patterned recurrence, and there is another kind of recurrence in how these places remain with us today. Students, visitors, writers, museum visitors, travelers, and listeners all return to them in different ways. The temples become models, the tombs become stories, the pyramids become symbols. The island sanctuaries become places of reflection. The ruins become a way to think about time. In this sense, Egypt is not only an ancient civilization, it is an ongoing presence in the human imagination. Its places keep reappearing because they answer something in us, our own need for continuity, our own desire to make meaning durable, our own hope that a name, a room, a gesture, or a path might last longer than a single day. That may be the deepest calm in all of this. Not the silence of dead stone, but the reassurance that human beings have long cared about preserving what they love. The builders of Egypt understood this with uncommon force. They invested their labor in places meant to outlast them. In doing so, they gave later generations a way to wander softly through time. So if your thoughts are becoming less linear now, that is all right. The places of Egypt do not insist on a strict order at this hour. They can be visited as fragments: a pyramid, a temple, a tomb, a statue, a river crossing, a carved wall, a sacred island. Each one is enough to rest upon for a while. And with that in mind, we can begin to let the journey slow even further, not by leaving Egypt, but by lingering one last time in the feeling that these places still hold a kind of listening in their stone. In the end, the legendary places of Egypt are not all monumental in the same way, but they are all part of a civilization that understood place as something meaningful, alive with memory, and closely linked to the rhythms of the universe. A tomb could be a passage, a temple could be a bridge, a city could be a sacred center, a riverbank could mark the boundary between worlds, a cliff could become a sanctuary, an island could hold a god. Even a ruin, now quiet and weathered, can still feel inhabited by intention. As the night grows deeper, it may be enough simply to let these places drift by. The Great Pyramid at Giza, the Sphinx, Karnak, Luxor, the Valley of the Kings, Abydos, Thebes, Philae, Abu Simbel, the worker villages, the frontier shrines, the sacred waters, the stone faces, and the long roads between them. Each one a small doorway into a larger past. You do not need to hold them all. It is enough to let one image rest, then another, and then another, until the mind begins to loosen its grip and follow the slow river of sleep. So let the desert darken gently, let the temples settle into shadow, let the inscriptions fade into quiet, and let the ancient places of Egypt remain for a while as they are, patient, distant, and somehow still near, while you drift more and more comfortably into rest. And if one place seems to appear a little more brightly in the mind than the others, it may simply be because Egypt was never only a single landscape. It was a long conversation between river, desert, and stone. The most famous places are often the ones that gathered many kinds of memory at once. A temple could be a sacred house, a royal statement, a calendar, a record of victories, a place of offering, and a setting for festivals. A tomb could be both a sealed chamber and a carefully prepared home for eternity. A city could be both practical and ceremonial. Even the road to a place could matter, because procession itself was part of meaning. This is one reason Egypt feels so enduring in the imagination. The places were built to do more than stand there. They were designed to participate in a world where the visible and invisible were closely joined. A carved wall was not merely decoration. It could be instruction, prayer, protection, remembrance, and order all at once. The soft light of dusk on sandstone may make that easier to sense than words ever could. There is something particularly gentle about thinking of the people who made these places, not as distant figures turned to dust, but as individuals who lived with weather, labor, family, expectation, and hope. The stonecutters who learned how to follow a line across a block of limestone. The painters who worked inside enclosed chambers where no audience would see them in daily life. The priests who kept lists, washed hands, opened doors, and repeated phrases. The farmers who watched the Nile and understood the difference between a promising flood and a difficult one. The boatmen who knew the current. The builders who could imagine a wall before it existed. The children who grew up in the shadow of great projects, seeing sacred architecture become part of ordinary sight. Because when we speak of legendary places, it is easy to imagine only grandeur. Yet the grandeur was made from many quiet acts: a measured stone, a rope pulled taut, a basket carried, a tablet inscribed, a niche repaired, a door lintel smoothed by hand, a statue placed carefully in a courtyard, a lamp lit in a chamber after sunset. These are not dramatic details, and that is part of their beauty. Civilization is often built from unremarkable motions repeated with patience. The temples along the Nile especially invite this kind of slow attention. Karnak, for instance, is not one single thing but a vast accumulation. It was shaped over generations by different rulers across changing centuries. That makes it feel less like a sudden masterpiece and more like a living archive of devotion. Columns were added, walls were extended, courts were opened, sacred lakes, pylons, chapels, and processional routes were arranged and rearranged. To walk there in the imagination is to feel time layered rather than flattened. A single place can contain many eras without losing its sense of calm. And Luxor Temple, set nearer the river, carries another kind of mood. It was connected with kingship and divine renewal, and later ages added their own traces. A sanctuary can remain meaningful even when its meanings have shifted slightly through time. The stones do not forget easily. They retain the impression of footsteps, of offerings, of ceremonial movement, of repeated arrival. At night, one can almost picture the torchlight along its avenues and the long, measured pace of festival processions. There is something deeply restful in the thought of people moving with purpose through a carefully ordered space. Not all legendary places are grand in scale. Some are small, quiet, and almost easily missed if one does not pause. The oasis settlements of the Western Desert, for example, were places of refuge and continuity, where water made life possible in unexpected pockets of green. The desert monasteries of later periods, though from a different chapter of history, also belong to Egypt's broader story of retreat, contemplation, and sacred solitude. Even the edges of the inhabited world became meaningful. Borders, wells, caravan stations, and watchpoints mattered because they linked safety with distance. In ancient Egypt, the world was often imagined in relation to the Nile Valley itself. To move away from the river was to move towards silence, heat, and openness. Yet even there, among the cliffs and sands, sacred places emerged. The desert was not simply emptiness. It was a place of transition, danger, revelation, and burial. It held quarries, tombs, hermitages, and hidden paths. It was a landscape where the boundaries between the seen and unseen could feel especially thin. That may be why so many tombs are cut into cliffs and hidden valleys. The Valley of the Kings is perhaps the best known of these places, but its power is not only in fame. It lies in the quiet logic of the site itself. The valley is enclosed, dry, and removed from the daily city. It suggests secrecy without needing to say so. The royal tombs placed there were intended to protect the journey of the dead king, and the walls inside were covered with texts and images that mapped an otherworldly passage. These were not merely rooms for burial. They were cosmic routes carefully prepared. The stillness of the valley today seems to echo the intended stillness of the chamber within. There is a particular kind of mystery around such places, and it is not always the mystery of what has been lost. Sometimes it is the mystery of how much was once understood. The ancient Egyptians did not build randomly. They knew their materials. They knew their astronomy, their landscape, their rituals, their symbolic geography. A tomb might be aligned in a meaningful direction. A temple axis might frame a sacred event. A wall scene might invoke a god, a season, or a mythic act. What looks silent to us was once full of intelligible detail. Even so, many things remain uncertain. That uncertainty can be comforting in its own way. It leaves room for reverence. The Great Pyramid, for example, is so often discussed in terms of precision, labor, and engineering that one might forget how quietly strange it still is. Its shape seems almost elemental, a mountain made by human will. A monument that narrows upward into a stable point. It has stood through centuries of wind, sand, political change, and urban expansion, and it continues to invite speculation not because it has no meaning, but because it has too many layers of meaning to be exhausted at once. At Giza, the pyramid complex as a whole becomes even more interesting. The pyramids, the smaller subsidiary tombs, the causeways, the temples, the plateau, the Sphinx, and the distant cityscape all belong together in a composed relationship. One place can be understood only partly by itself. The Sphinx, especially, has gathered an unusual kind of quiet attention across the ages. It is carved from stone, but it feels almost like a question resting in the sand. Its weathered form suggests endurance. while its missing nose and eroded surfaces remind us that age changes all things, even monumental ones. People have projected stories onto it for centuries, and perhaps that is fitting. Some landmarks seem designed to hold many interpretations without ever settling into only one. The Sphinx also belongs to the broader ancient habit of combining human and divine qualities in a single image. Egypt often expressed sacred authority through hybrid forms. Human intelligence, animal strength, royal dignity, solar symbolism, and divine protection could all be joined in one figure. This may seem unfamiliar at first, but it reflects a world in which the natural and spiritual were not separated as sharply as they often are today. To make a statue that merges forms is to say that reality itself is layered. A calm way to think about these ideas is not to demand a single answer from any one monument, but to let each place suggest a mood. Giza suggests scale and order. Abydos suggests sacred remembrance and the nearness of myth. Karnak suggests accumulated devotion over time. Luxor suggests ceremonial continuity. The Valley of the Kings suggests secrecy and preparation. Philae suggests island sanctuary and delicate endurance. Abu Simbel suggests devotion carved into rock with remarkable confidence. The oasis sites suggest survival at the edges. The ancient cities suggest daily life made visible through ruins. Abydos, in particular, carries a gentler and more intimate aura than some of the more imposing sites. It was associated with Osiris, one of the great gods of death, renewal, and hidden life. Pilgrimage there was meaningful because the site linked earthly burial with mythic resurrection. In the ancient imagination, places associated with gods could become places where human hopes were especially concentrated. A sacred city was not simply a settlement. It was a place where stories of origin and transformation seemed to settle into the land. And in many such places, the stories are not only grand but tender. The myth of Osiris, for example, is not merely a tale of death. It is also a tale of loss, searching, restoration, and continuity. That is perhaps why it resonated so deeply in Egyptian thought. To live beside the Nile was to know that life depended on cycles of disappearance and return. The flood receded, the field became dry, the seed lay hidden, and then growth came again. The mythology and the environment spoke to one another. A legend could feel true because it mirrored the river. This quality of mirroring runs through so much of Egyptian sacred architecture. A temple might represent the ordered cosmos, with its courts and sanctuaries echoing the passage from the common world into the divine presence. A tomb might represent the underworld journey, with passages, texts, and chambers guiding the dead through stages of transformation. The layout of a sacred site could be a form of thought made visible. That is a soothing idea in itself. It suggests that human beings have long wanted to build not only useful structures, but meaningful ones. The city of Thebes, in its ancient prominence, offers another example of a place that cannot be reduced to a single image. Today the area is known through the great monuments that survive, but in its time it was a powerful center of kingship, religion, and urban life. Thebes was not just temples and tombs. It was a lived city, a place of movement, administration, craft, ceremony, and ordinary routines. To think of it is to imagine streets, storehouses, docks, workshops, gardens, and homes, all arranged under the same sun that touched the columns of the temples. The monumental remains are only the brightest pieces of a much larger human setting. That is true of Egypt generally. The famous places are the visible crest of a much wider civilization. Behind every famous monument there were smaller shrines, household objects, local gods, administrative centers, labor camps, boat landings, and cemeteries. The ordinary was not separate from the sacred. A jar, a loaf, a mirror, a comb, a linen wrap, a painted coffin, a clay figurine, a stela, a letter, a boundary marker, a name inscribed on a pot, all belonged to the world that made the legendary places possible. It can be strangely calming to remember this. The ancient past was not made only of wonders, it was made of daily life, which itself became wonder when arranged with care. There are places in Egypt where the scale of ambition feels especially strong, and Abu Simbel is one of them. Cut into the cliffside with great confidence, it stands as a reminder that the ancient world could shape stone not only by stacking blocks, but by removing what was unnecessary from the mountain itself. The colossal statues at its facade seem to sit in patient watchfulness. Their presence is solemn, not noisy. Even before one thinks of relocation and modern preservation efforts, the site already feels like a meeting of permanence and vulnerability. A monument so firmly anchored can still be at the mercy of water, time, and human change. The later rescue of Abu Simbel in the modern era adds another layer of story, though not a loud one. A temple once bound to a cliff was carefully dismantled and raised again to escape the floodwaters created by a new dam. This is a rare kind of reversal. A monument built to outlast centuries had to be moved in order to continue existing. And yet the move itself became part of its legend. It showed that modern people, too, can participate in preservation with reverence. A place can be saved by labor that is almost invisible once completed. The result is a kind of continuity across ages, a relay of care. Continuity is a word that appears again and again when thinking about Egyptian places because continuity was one of the civilization's deepest values. Names were repeated, forms were preserved, rituals were renewed, kings inherited titles, gods retained attributes while also absorbing new associations. Temples were rebuilt on older foundations, tombs echoed earlier designs. Even when styles changed, memory remained active. This does not mean that Egypt was static. It means that change often arrived wrapped in respect for what had come before. That is one reason the ruins can feel so composed. They were not random accidents of history. Many were designed with the expectation that they would become links in a longer chain. A temple could be restored and enlarged by later rulers. An old sanctuary could remain sacred even after political power moved elsewhere. A river town could be superseded and yet still remembered in inscriptions and pilgrimage. The land itself became a repository of layered time. If one lingers a little longer on the river, the whole civilization seems to drift softly by. The Nile was not just a source of water. It was a pathway, a calendar, a boundary, a livelihood, and a sacred presence. Its predictable movements made planning possible, but its variations also kept people attentive. To live beside the river was to be in relationship with rhythm. Boats moved where roads might not. Goods traveled from south to north and back again. Shrines and cities aligned themselves with this movement. In many ways, the river connected Egypt to itself. The river also gave Egypt a unique sense of orientation. The land could be imagined as a narrow living line between two expanses of desert. One bank, one opposite bank, each with its own symbolic associations in some periods and contexts. The world of cultivation, settlement, and life concentrated close to the water. Beyond lay the quieter, harsher spaces of the sun and sand. This contrast sharpened the emotional landscape of the civilization. The green strip along the river could feel almost miraculous in relation to the surrounding aridity. That miracle was renewed every year. It is easy to imagine how such a setting might deepen human attention to the afterlife. When life itself depends so visibly on return and renewal, death does not appear as simple vanishing. It becomes another threshold, another cycle, another passage that may require maps, names, provisions, and protection. The ancient Egyptian funeral traditions reflect this carefully. Objects were placed in tombs, texts were recited, images were painted, bodies were prepared. The dead were not forgotten to the elements, they were accompanied, and the places associated with burial became, in their own way, places of intimacy. The Valley of the Queens, the tombs of nobles, the private chapels, the mastabas of earlier periods, the cemeteries outside cities, all formed part of a geography of remembrance. Some burials were lavish, others modest. Yet all were expressions of a desire that the person not disappear without trace. That desire is one of the quietest and oldest human impulses. It appears again and again across cultures, and in Egypt it was written into stone with unusual clarity. There are also places in Egyptian history that are legendary because they exist partly at the border between fact and dream. The lost city of Thonis Heracleion, discovered in modern times beneath the sea, has a quality of recovered memory. For years it belonged more to legend than to visible reality. A city once active in trade and ritual, later submerged and forgotten, then slowly reassembled through archaeological work. Such places are especially moving because they remind us that the map of the past is incomplete until the earth, sand, or water yields what it has held. A similar feeling surrounds the broader stories of sunken temples, buried harbors, vanished settlements, and lost quarters of ancient cities. Egypt's famous monuments often occupy the high ground of memory, but there are also lower, hidden, or submerged places that speak more softly. A broken harbor statue under silt, a mud brick wall beneath a field, a painted coffin uncovered from a cache, a row of jars sealed for centuries. Each discovery narrows the gap between present and past without ever closing it completely. In a bedtime mood, that incompleteness can be comforting. The past does not need to be solved all at once. Some mysteries are kept gentle by the fact that they remain partially hidden. The name of a builder may be lost while the pyramid remains. A ritual may be known in outline but not in every detail. A city may be described in inscriptions but not fully excavated. A god may be represented in many ways without yielding one fixed meaning. The uncertainty leaves room for imagination to rest. Even the written language of ancient Egypt carries this feeling of layered return. Hieroglyphs are often admired for their beauty, but they also embody a special relationship between image and sound. A sign could represent a thing, a sound, or a concept depending on context. To read such writing is to move slowly, attentive to nuance. The script does not rush, it invites looking. It asks for recognition. On temple walls, in tombs, on stelae, and in administrative texts, writing itself became part of the architecture of memory. The places and the words belong together. Later visitors and scholars, of course, had to work hard to recover that language. The long process of understanding ancient Egyptian writing gave the modern world a way back into the civilization's thought. That recovery feels almost like opening a sealed chamber and finding that the air inside still carries meaning. Suddenly, the images are not silent decoration alone. They are sentences, names, prayers, titles, offerings, warnings, and stories. A wall can begin speaking again after centuries of quiet, yet even before texts were fully understood, the monuments inspired awe. This suggests that some of the feeling of Egypt comes before translation. Proportion, placement, mass, and silence can speak in their own way. A colonnade in shadow, a corridor narrowing toward a sanctuary, a statue facing the river, a tomb entrance hidden in rock, a painted ceiling of stars, a deserted path between fields and cliffs. These things create an atmosphere even without explanation. They settle into memory as if they have always been known. The Egyptians themselves seem to understand atmosphere very well. Sacred spaces were often approached through transition, from open court to enclosed hall, from bright sunlight to dim chamber, from the profane to the protected. This movement softened the mind. It created a sense of arrival. One did not simply step into a temple, one entered it gradually. That gradualness is one of the reasons ancient places can feel so suitable for late-night listening. They do not demand sharp attention. They allow the mind to wander slowly inward. There is also the matter of color, which survives now mostly in traces. Many ancient Egyptian monuments were painted, gilded, or inlaid. What we see today as pale stone once held brighter surfaces. Blues, reds, yellows, greens, blacks, and whites were used with care. The effect would have been vivid but controlled, not chaotic. Color in ancient Egypt often had symbolic weight as well as aesthetic value. Blue could evoke the sky, water, or rebirth. Green could suggest growth. Gold could suggest the flesh of the gods, radiance, or imperishability. White could imply purity or sacredness. Even color belonged to the moral and cosmological order. To imagine these places in full is to restore not just their missing parts, but their former atmosphere. The temple columns might have gleamed, the tomb corridors might have been deep with pigment, the statues might have worn painted eyes, the coffins might have been carefully decorated. The boats on the river might have carried bright cloth and goods. The city walls might have stood against the sun in warm tones. The past was not monochrome, it was alive with subtle brightness, and yet the weathered forms we see now have their own dignity. Sanded edges and faded surfaces reveal time as a collaborator. The monuments have not failed because they aged. They have become more contemplative. A worn relief can feel closer to the hand. A broken statue can seem more vulnerable and therefore more human. A collapsed wall can reveal the thickness of the original. A cracked column can show the long pressure of centuries. The passage of time does not only destroy, it also quiets. This quietness is part of what makes Egypt's legendary places so suited to reflection. They remind us that power, ritual, artistry, administration, devotion, and memory can all be gathered into a single site and then slowly released into history. A place can outlive its original purpose and acquire a new one as a source of thought. The temple is no longer only for the god. The tomb is no longer only for the dead. The ruin is no longer only a remnant. It becomes a place for the living to remember scale, patience, and continuity. There are many smaller legends tucked into the folds of these famous places as well. The stories of hidden chambers, the accounts of royal names restored, the fragments of papyrus found in trash heaps or tombs, the evidence of artisans' marks left on stones that were never meant to be seen, the existence of workmen's villages, where the people who built royal tombs made homes, kept records, and left behind traces of meals, tools, and daily life. These details make the ancient world feel closer. They tell us that behind every monumental project there were neighborhoods, routines, and ordinary evenings. The village of Deir el-Medina, for instance, is one of the quiet marvels of Egyptian history because it preserves the lives of those artisans with unusual intimacy. Here were the workers who constructed the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Their records reveal disputes, absence from work, personal concerns, deliveries, and practical matters. This is not the stuff of epic legend in the usual sense, and yet it is deeply legendary in another way. It shows the human fabric behind the great tombs. Even the most famous monuments depend on ordinary hands. That is perhaps the gentlest truth of all. Legendary places are never made by legend alone. They are made by people who carried stone, drew lines, mixed pigments, organized food, and returned day after day. They are made by communities, not abstractions. In that sense, the old cities and temples are like layered blankets of effort and memory. Every stone rests on another stone. Every story rests on another story. Every name survives because someone somewhere chose to preserve it. As the night grows softer still, one can imagine moving from site to site not by urgency but by drifting attention. A river breeze at Aswan, a shadow across the colossi of Memnon, the still courtyards of Karnak at dawn, the quiet steps down into a tomb, the cool shade of a temple hall, the edge of the desert beyond a sacred town, a palm grove near an oasis, the hush inside a museum gallery where a small object rests behind glass. Egypt's places do not have to be visited all at once. They can simply appear one by one like remembered images surfacing just before sleep. There is no need to force a conclusion from them. Their power is not argumentative. It is atmospheric. They invite patience. They invite the recognition that civilizations are not only made of dates and dynasties, but of places where people returned again and again to do what mattered to them, to honor gods, to bury the dead, to mark a season, to protect a border, to cross the river, to leave a name, to build something meant to last. That perhaps is why Egypt remains so easy to imagine and so hard to exhaust. Its legendary places are anchored in actual geography, but they also belong to a larger human desire for permanence, beauty, and meaningful order. When we think of them, we are thinking not only of temples and tombs, but of the hope that life can leave careful traces: a house of stone, a carved name, a painted chamber, a sacred island, a hidden valley, a city remembered in a text, a harbour recovered from water, a pyramid still meeting the dawn. And as each of these images passes through the mind, they can do what old places sometimes do best. They can slow the pulse of thought. They can make the world feel a little less hurried. They can remind us that vast spans of time exist and that human beings have always tried to meet them with grace. So let the image of Egypt become softer now. Let the stones cool in the mind. Let the sand settle. Let the river move quietly past its banks. Let the names remain only as a gentle murmur: Giza, Thebes, Abydos, Karnak, Luxor, Philae, Abu Simbel, the Valley of the Kings, the lost harbours, the desert shrines, the hidden tombs, the worker villages, the temples in the sun. They can all wait there in the dimness, patient and unhurried. And if sleep is near, it may come like the Nile at night, moving steadily through a landscape that has known many centuries, carrying each quiet thought downstream until it can rest. Beyond those familiar names, there are still more Egyptian places that seem to hover at the edge of memory, half historical and half dreamlike, as though the land itself were keeping a few last secrets tucked beneath the sand. Some are famous enough to draw travelers from far away, yet even their fame does not fully explain them. They remain larger than their descriptions. They are easier to feel than to summarize. Consider for a moment the temples of Philae, once set upon an island where the water and the stone seem to belong to one another. The name itself sounds soft enough for sleep, and the place has an almost floating quality in the mind. Philae was associated with the worship of Isis, one of the most enduring goddesses in the Egyptian world, a figure of mourning, magic, protection, and renewal. In late antiquity, when many older temples across Egypt were changing or falling silent, Philae remained active for a long time. It became one of the last places where the old religious traditions were still visibly practiced. That detail gives the temple a special tenderness. It was not merely a monument to the past. It was, for a long while, a place where the past still breathed, and yet even places that survive are often altered by the modern world. Philae was eventually moved stone by stone to a higher location when the rising waters of the Aswan High Dam threatened to cover the original island. This was an extraordinary feat of preservation, but it also introduced a quiet sadness. The temple was saved by being relocated, which means that the place we see now is both itself and not quite itself. Many ancient places exist in this way, partly original and partly remembered, bound together by human care across great distances of time. There is something moving in that. It suggests that preservation is its own form of devotion. The ancient island of Elephantine, also near Aswan, carries a very different mood, though it too belongs to the river's southern reach. The name may call to mind elephants, but its origins lie in the shape of the rocks and the island's role as a borderland. Elephantine was a key administrative and trade centre, especially in relation to Nubia and the regions to the south. Because it sat at the threshold between Egypt and other lands, it became a place of exchange, movement, and diplomacy. Temples stood there as well, and over time the island accumulated layer upon layer of settlement, from early pharaonic periods through later eras. Archaeologists have found remains that speak not only of rulers and priests, but of ordinary daily life, of houses and storage and small decisions made beside the river. In a place like Elephantine, the long conversation between Egypt and its neighbours feels especially visible. The island seems to listen in both directions, toward the heart of the kingdom and toward the unknown. A little further north in memory, one can drift to the Fayum, that broad and fertile depression fed by the Nile's waters and ancient engineering. The Fayum has its own kind of legendary atmosphere, quieter perhaps than the great temple sites, but no less rich. In the age of the Middle Kingdom, the region was transformed by ambitious water management, and became deeply important to agriculture. Later, under Greco-Roman rule, it also became known for the portraits placed over mummies in some burials there, painted faces that remain startlingly immediate, as if an individual from long ago were briefly meeting our gaze across a very great silence. The Fayum portraits are not monumental in the usual sense. They are intimate. They suggest the tenderness with which the living once accompanied the dead. They also remind us that Egyptian history was never frozen in one style or one age. It changed, adapted, and absorbed new influences while retaining old habits of reverence. Nearby in that same layered landscape stood the great labyrinth associated with Hawara, a site ancient writers described with wonder. The labyrinth is one of those places that seems almost too elusive to hold on to. Its exact form is still discussed, and much of it has vanished, but the memory of it persists powerfully in classical texts. Herodotus and later authors wrote of an enormous complex of chambers and courtyards, so intricate that it could rival the pyramids in sheer amazement. Whether every detail of those descriptions can be verified now matters less, perhaps, than the impression they left behind. Some structures survive not because every wall remains, but because the human mind cannot easily relinquish the idea of them. The labyrinth at Hawara belongs to that category. It is a place that haunts the historical imagination. There are also the lesser-known pyramid fields, quiet and sunlit, far from the overwhelming fame of Giza. At places like Darsha, the air seems to preserve experiments in form. The bent pyramid with its change in angle partway upward feels almost like a thought that was revised while still being built. Nearby, the Red Pyramid offers another, steadier ascent, one of the earliest true pyramids and a landmark in the long development of royal tomb architecture. These monuments are not only objects of awe, they are records of trial, adaptation, and ingenuity. The builders were learning, and the landscape remembers that learning. The slight irregularity, the success after adjustment, the boldness of scale, all of it has a quiet dignity. One can imagine the ancient horizon around Darsha, with fewer structures than today, the pyramids standing more solitary than they do now, their edges bright in the sun, their stones still young in the world. A little farther south, the site of Abydos calls up some of the oldest and most solemn associations in Egyptian religion. Abydos was linked to Osiris, god of the dead and of renewal, and became a powerful center of pilgrimage. In ancient belief, to be associated with Osiris was to be tied to a deep mystery about death and return, loss and continuity. The Osirian at Abydos, with its monumental, partially submerged appearance, adds to the sense of hidden depth. It seems almost like a structure discovered in a dream, part temple and part archaic underworld chamber. The main temple of Seti at Abydos is also especially beloved for the beauty of its reliefs. Here, the carvings can feel patient and exact, full of sacred lists, gods, ritual scenes, and carefully preserved memory. One famous corridor contains the king list that helped later generations understand the order of rulers. In such a place, history becomes both record and rite. Abydos also reminds us that not all legendary places are built primarily for display. Some are destinations of devotion. Pilgrims came there with purpose, carrying offerings and hopes. The road to such a place was itself part of the meaning. To travel to Abydos was to join a long chain of visitors who believed that nearness to a sacred site mattered. This is a gentle and ancient idea, still recognizable even now, that a place can hold more than geography, that it can gather feeling over centuries until the ground itself seems to remember. There are stories, too, of an older, shadowed Egypt that precedes the great dynasties and makes them possible. Pre-dynastic and early dynastic sites are less polished in the public imagination, but they carry a kind of profound stillness. At Nakada, Hierakonpolis, and other early settlements, archaeologists have uncovered traces of a world gradually organizing itself into kingship, symbolism, and monumental form. These are not glamorous sites in the familiar sense, but they are full of beginnings. One can imagine the first ceremonial objects, the first large cemeteries, the first tentative images of power becoming visible. The river villages of that early time were not empty or primitive. They were inventive, connected, and alive with the slow formation of traditions that would last for millennia. In the darkness before sleep, it can be comforting to think of such beginnings because they remind us that even the grandest histories start in small acts of shaping and attention. The Delta, too, has its vanished and half-vanished places. It is a region often underrepresented in the popular image of Egypt because so much of its ancient landscape lies beneath modern settlement or has been altered by the river's changing courses. Yet the delta was always crucial, a broad and productive expanse of waterways, marshes, temples, and towns. Some ancient cities there are known mainly through texts, fragments, and excavation reports. Tanis, for example, once a royal capital in the Third Intermediate Period, was long buried in mud and wet ground, which helped preserve some of its monuments. It can feel almost paradoxical that a place so important was also so hidden. When excavators uncovered the wealth of Tanis, including royal burials and finely worked objects, they revealed a capital that had fallen into obscurity while still holding onto its treasures. There is a special melancholy in capitals that outlast their political moment. They become quiet witnesses to the rise and fall of legitimacy. In the same broad region, the ancient city of Bubastes is associated with the cat-headed goddess Bastet, whose cult was beloved and widely celebrated. Bastet's worship suggests another side of Egyptian sacred life, more domestic, protective, and gently joyful than the stern grandeur often emphasized in popular imagination. Festivals at Bubastes were said to have been lively and communal, with music and processions and the movement of people along the river. Even when we cannot recover every detail, the image of a city dedicated to a beloved goddess gives a softer contour to Egypt's religious world. Not every sacred place was about silence and monumental scale. Some were about companionship, comfort, and the blessing of home. Then there is Heliopolis, once one of the great centers of learning and solar theology, now largely reduced to traces within modern Cairo. Its very disappearance gives it a certain dreamlike quality. Heliopolis was associated with the sun god Ra and the creation myths that imagined the world emerging from primordial waters and first light. Ancient obelisks once stood there in greater number, and later many were moved elsewhere, leaving only echoes of the original landscape. Obelisks themselves are worth lingering over in the mind. Tall, elegant, and seemingly effortless in their ascent, they are among the most recognizable forms in the Egyptian world, yet each one represented enormous labor and technical skill. They were carved from single blocks of stone, transporting with great difficulty and set upright with precision. They are both simple and astonishing, like a line drawn from earth toward the sky. When the mind is quiet, an obelisk can become almost a thought in stone. One of the most famous of these once stood at Heliopolis, and others still adorn places far from their original homes. This scattering of Egyptian objects across the world creates a strange secondary geography. An obelisk in Paris or London or Rome is no longer where it began, but it still carries with it the memory of the Nile Valley. In this way, Egypt's legendary places have sent out fragments of themselves into many other cities. A visitor in a museum may stand before a statue, a papyrus, a sarcophagus, or a painted coffin and feel, for a moment, the atmosphere of a distant temple precinct. The object becomes a small bridge across time and place. It is a reminder that Egypt's stories have never stayed entirely within Egypt, even though their roots remain there. Among the quieter wonders are the small chapels, processional avenues, and temple precincts that once linked sacred spaces together in ways we can still partly trace. At Karnak, for example, the great temple complex was not built all at once. It accumulated over centuries, each ruler adding to what previous generations had made. This gives Karnak the feeling of a living archive, Its halls and pylons and courts do not present a single moment. They present the patience of continuity. The great hypostyle hall with its forest of columns can feel almost breathable in imagination, as though one were walking into a grove made of stone. Light filters between the columns in narrow paths. The scale is overwhelming, but in a restful way because it is ordered and repetitive. Repetition can be soothing. Ancient builders knew this perhaps better than we do. A column after column, a rhythm of carved capitals, a procession of symbols repeating in measured sequence, these are forms that invite the mind to slow down. Luxor Temple, by contrast, feels more intimate and urban, woven into the life of the city. It was linked to the annual Opit festival, when divine images travelled between Karnak and Luxor in a ceremonial procession. This festival must have altered the atmosphere of the whole region. Boats on the river, priests moving in ritual order, crowds gathered along the way, the sound of celebration and reverence meeting in one current. Even in the ruins, the idea of procession remains palpable. Luxor Temple also survived through many eras, later becoming part of Roman, Christian, and Islamic layers of occupation. It is common in Egypt to find sacred spaces reused rather than erased. This continuity through transformation is one of the country's most remarkable historical textures. A place is not necessarily abandoned when its purpose changes. Sometimes it simply begins speaking in a different accent. One can follow that thought farther into the ancient city of Memphis, once a major capital and a pivotal point between Upper and Lower Egypt. Much of Memphis has vanished beneath later habitation, but its importance was immense. It stood near the apex of the delta and served as a political and administrative center for long periods of Egyptian history. The colossal statue of Ramesses II, now displayed at Mitrahina, gives a sense of the grandeur that once defined the city. Yet Memphis is also remembered through its religious life, its workshops, its access to trade routes, and its role as a meeting place between regions. Capitals are often imagined as polished centers of command, but in reality they are also places of noise, movement, storage, labor, and negotiation. Memphis would have known all of that. Its true shape is partly lost, which perhaps makes it feel even more like a memory embedded in the land. Far in the western desert, Siwa Oasis appears like a green thought amid immense stillness. The journey there, even today, has a sense of crossing into a different mood. Siwa is associated with the Oracle of Ammon, which drew attention from ancient rulers and later from Alexander the Great, whose visit has become one of the best-known episodes in the oasis's long story. The oracle's exact words are not preserved in any straightforward way, and perhaps that is fitting. Oracles often live at the edge of certainty, where interpretation becomes part of the event. Siwa itself has long been shaped by its relative isolation, by salt lakes, date palms, and a local culture distinct in many respects from the Nile Valley. The old mud-brick fortress of Shali, though much later in date, also contributes to the impression of a place built in dialogue with scarcity and shelter. In the quiet of the oasis, one can imagine ancient pilgrims arriving dusty and tired, finding water, shade, and a voice said to come from a god. The desert more broadly holds many places that feel almost suspended in time. The White Desert, the Black Desert, the remote temple remains at Dakhla and Karga, the routes once travelled by caravans, all belong to a landscape where silence itself seems historical. Ancient Egypt was not only the Nile. It was also the broad frame of desert around it, the spaces between settlements, the paths used by traders, herders, soldiers, and pilgrims. Some of the most interesting archaeological discoveries have been made in these marginal places, where people adapted to difficult conditions and left behind traces of remarkable resilience. Forts, way stations, inscriptions, and small shrines tell of movement across land that can appear empty from a distance. Yet emptiness is never quite empty. It is filled with the memory of passage. On the eastern edge, too, there were important routes, mines, and ports connecting Egypt to the Red Sea and beyond. The port of Berenike, for instance, became a node in long-distance trade during later periods, linking Egypt with Arabia, East Africa, and India. Though not usually among the first places named in a conversation about legendary Egypt, Berenike deserves a place in the mind because it reveals another side of ancient civilization, the quieter commerce of daily exchange. Spices, textiles, animals, shells, ceramics, and ideas moved through such harbors. Ships came and went according to winds and seasons. A port is a temporary city of arrivals. Its legend lies not in permanence, but in connection. The far horizon matters there. One can almost feel the patience of waiting for a vessel to appear as a small shape on the water. A similar mood of distant contact can be found in the inscriptions and artifacts from trade routes through the Sinai. Serabit el-Khadim, with its ancient turquoise mines and temple to Hathor, is one of those places where resource extraction and devotion meet in an unexpectedly human way. Workers there carved inscriptions in one of the earliest known alphabetic scripts, a development of extraordinary importance in world history. Yet the site is not only significant because of script history. It is also haunting because it sits in a stark, remote landscape where labor was difficult and belief was persistent. The temple to Hathor, called the Lady of Turquoise, linked the hard glitter of stone to the tenderness of divine protection. The contrast is memorable. Even in harsh places, people sought blessing. At times, Egypt's legendary places are also made of fragments rather than ruins in the monumental sense. Consider the simple satisfaction of a painted shard, a statue head separated from its body, a lintel with a few remaining hieroglyphs, a stela leaning in the sand. Each fragment asks the same gentle question: what larger world did this once belong to? The answer is usually both specific and incomplete. We know enough to imagine, but not enough to finish the image entirely. That incompletion is part of the atmosphere. It leaves room for silence. It invites the imagination to rest rather than to solve. In this way, the temples and tombs are not the only legendary places. Workshops, necropolis, quarries, docks, palaces, gardens, and administrative centers also belong to the story. Even a quarry can feel profound when one thinks about the labor that shaped the stones of monuments now admired from afar. At Aswan, the granite quarries still speak of extraction and effort. The unfinished obelisk, left partly detached from the bedrock, offers one of the clearest glimpses into ancient stone-working technique. It is an extraordinary object precisely because it was never completed. Its brokenness preserves the process. A finished monument may impress, but an unfinished one can tell us more about the hands that made it. The marks of chisels and the planning of weight and fracture are all there, quiet and legible like the traces of thought. Aswan itself has long had a special place in the Egyptian imagination. The cataracts of the Nile, the southern boundary regions, and the cultural interactions with Nubia all gave the area a layered identity. Temples at nearby Philae and elsewhere in the region remind us that borders were never simply edges. They were zones of contact, exchange, and reverence. In some ancient texts, the south appears as a place of mystery and power, not merely distance. The river there changes character, moving through rocks and islands, and the landscape seems to ask for slower attention. One can sit mentally on a riverbank in Aswan and watch the water glitter in a way that feels almost eternal. Then there are the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, which remain among the most evocative places on earth precisely because they are hidden in a dry, quiet valley under the Theban hills. The choice of this valley for royal burials reveals a delicate blend of secrecy, symbolism, and landscape awareness. The cliffs and wadis form a natural enclosure. The tombs carved into them were meant to secure the king's journey into the next world, but they also became repositories of art so intricate that they still take the breath gently away. Even when the chambers are small, the painted ceilings and corridors can create a sense of vastness within confinement. Blue ceilings dotted with stars, processions of deities, books of the underworld unfolding in disciplined lines. These are not images of panic or fear, but of order imposed upon mystery. The tomb of Tutankhamun has its own special place in modern memory because of its discovery and the astonishing preservation of many objects within it. Yet beyond the famous treasures lies the more ordinary fact that this was one royal burial among many, and that other tombs in the valley have greater depth, beauty, and scale. The appeal of the valley is not only in fame, it is in its accumulated atmosphere. Each tomb belongs to a particular ruler, but together they form a kind of subterranean neighborhood of the dead, arranged with solemn care. Even now, the silence of the valley feels deliberate, as though the hills were guarding old dreams. On the opposite bank, the Valley of the Queens holds another set of stories, among them the tomb of Nefertari, renowned for its brilliant decoration. Nefertari's tomb is often described as one of the most beautiful in Egypt, and the phrase is understandable, though beauty here is not merely decorative. It is also compositional and ceremonial. The colors, the forms, the balance of scenes all contribute to a restful completeness. Her presence in the underworld imagery is dignified and graceful. Nearby, tombs of princes and princesses speak of the larger royal household, reminding us that dynasties were not abstract lines, but families with grief, affection, and expectation. The Theban necropolis as a whole invites a softer mode of looking than the one often associated with monuments. It is a place where the dead were not hidden away in indifference, but tended through ritual and inscription. The mortuary temples built on the edge of cultivation, near the living fields, created a relationship between life and death that was both practical and symbolic. At Medinet Habu, for example, the Temple of Ramesses III stands with strong reliefs and massive walls, yet the site also accumulated later usage and traces of daily life. In many such places, the sacred and the domestic coexist in subtle ways. The world of ancient Egypt did not divide neatly into categories. Gods, kings, scribes, workers, ancestors, and the dead all shared the same broad landscape of attention. There are also stories preserved in cemeteries of animals, which might seem like a small subject until one remembers how deeply animals were woven into ancient Egyptian thought. The catacombs of sacred bulls, ibises, and other animals at sites such as Saqqara and elsewhere reveal devotion, expressed through burial in forms that today feel both surprising and touching. Animals were not mere symbols, they were living participants in a sacred economy of presence. The cult of the Apis bull, for example, linked a single animal to divine vitality and royal legitimacy. When such a bull died, it was treated with ritual seriousness. The same is true of the many mummified animals dedicated as offerings. This may seem distant from the grandest temples, but in fact it broadens the emotional range of the civilization. Reverence was not restricted to kings and gods. It extended outward into the lives of creatures and the rhythms of nature. And nature itself in Egypt is one of the quietest legendary forces. The annual flood of the Nile, now controlled by modern engineering, once arrived as a life-giving cycle that shaped agriculture, calendars, and expectation. To live by the flood was to live with attentiveness to time and season. The river's regularity likely contributed to the Egyptian sense of cosmic order, the idea that proper alignment and balance mattered. This same principle of order can be felt in their architecture, where symmetry, orientation, and proportion often convey more than mere aesthetics. They express a worldview. A temple facing the sun, a burial aligned to the west, a processional way leading toward a sanctuary. These are spatial forms of meaning. The land becomes a diagram of belief. Yet despite all the order, Egypt also contains a great deal that is uncertain. Some cities are known through a few lines in a text. Some palaces have left only foundations. Some royal names are obscure. Some temple functions are still debated. Archaeology, there is not just recovery but conversation with absence. When a wall is uncovered, it may raise as many questions as it answers. Who walked there? What was heard in that courtyard? Which festivals were held? which songs were sung, which disputes arose in the shade. The unknown portions remain large, and perhaps that is part of what makes the topic restful rather than closed. The mind can drift among the questions without needing to solve them. One especially beautiful quality of Egypt's legendary places is that they often preserve multiple periods at once. A temple may begin in the Old Kingdom, be expanded in the New Kingdom, reused in the Roman era, and later studied by modern archaeologists. A city may rise, change, decline, and leave behind layers of pottery, inscriptions, and street plans. This piling of time is not only a scholarly fact, it is an aesthetic experience. Ancient places in Egypt often feel like sedimented memory. The eye sees one era, and the ground below holds others. It is a civilization built in many ways on the acceptance that time is stratified rather than linear. Nothing entirely disappears. It becomes part of what comes after. There are legends, too, that cling to the edges of specific monuments. Stories of curses, hidden chambers, secret passages, royal treasures, buried archives, and lost tombs have long surrounded Egyptian sites. Some of these stories are modern inventions. Others are born from ancient beliefs about sacred space and the protection of the dead. While it is easy to overstate such tales, they persist for a reason. Closed spaces invite imagination. A sealed door invites wonder. An unopened chamber can seem almost more alive than an open one because it holds possibility in suspension. Egypt has always been fertile ground for this kind of thinking. The very abundance of monuments creates the sense that more remains unseen than seen. Still, the unsolved mystery need not be sensational. It can be quiet. It can be the missing layout of a palace at Amarna, the uncertain function of a ritual object, the still debated route of a funerary procession, the vanished appearance of a harbour now underwater, the exact tone of an ancient hymn. These smaller uncertainties are often more interesting than dramatic legends because they are close to the fabric of real life. They suggest that the past was once ordinary in ways we can barely reconstruct. Someone once turned a handle, sealed a jar, arranged flowers, wrote a letter, or waited for a messenger. Civilization is built from such almost invisible acts, and perhaps that is the best way to think about Egypt when the room is growing darker. Not as a collection of giant monuments alone, but as a long continuum of human care. A sculptor smoothing limestone, a priest carrying incense, a child learning a story about the gods, a boatman pulling a vessel along the river, a mason measuring a block, a farmer watching the flood, a scribe folding papyrus, a mother placing a small amulet near a sleeping child, a craftsman painting a coffin lid, a pilgrim climbing a hill toward a shrine. These are the gestures behind the famous places. They are the things that made the places feel worth remembering. In later periods, when Greece and Rome left their mark on Egypt, the old land continued to absorb new forms without losing its ancient core. Alexandria is perhaps the clearest example of this layered identity. Founded by Alexander the Great and developed into a major cosmopolitan city, Alexandria became famous for its library, its scholarship, its lighthouse, and its role as a meeting point among cultures. Much of the ancient city is now underwater or buried beneath the modern one, which only deepens its aura. The Library of Alexandria, though often described in simplified terms, belongs to the broader idea of a place devoted to knowledge, study, translation, and inquiry. Its loss became symbolic in later memory, representing the fragility of learning. But Alexandria itself was more than a loss. It was a living city for centuries, a harbour of ideas and goods, a place where thought moved as freely as ships. The lighthouse, the Pharos, became one of the ancient wonders of the world, and for good reason. A lighthouse is both practical and poetic. It warns, guides, and comforts travellers. To place such a structure at the threshold of a harbour was to acknowledge the vulnerability of arrival. Even now, the idea of a light on the edge of the sea carries emotional force. In the case of Alexandria, the lighthouse stood as a sign of human orientation amid uncertainty. just as many Egyptian monuments do in their own way. They give shape to vastness. They say, here is a point of rest, a place to orient the mind. Old Cairo and the later Islamic layers of Egypt offer another example of continuity and adaptation. While not ancient in the pharaonic sense, they belong to the same broader story of accumulation. Mosques, churches, fortifications, streets, and markets sit near older remains, creating a city that is, in effect, a palimpsest of belief and habit. The Roman fortress of Babylon in Cairo, churches of extraordinary antiquity, medieval minarets, and nearby museums together remind us that Egypt's legendary places were never confined to one era. The country is a long conversation between civilizations, each answering the previous one in a different register. Even the museums themselves can feel like places of quiet pilgrimage. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo, with its dense gathering of objects, once offered a classic form of encounter with the past. Room after room of statues, jewelry, wooden figures, inscriptions, and coffins. The Grand Egyptian Museum, in its newer form, carries forward that same impulse toward preservation and display on a more expansive scale. Inside a museum, the monumental and the intimate can sit side by side. A colossal statue may tower nearby a tiny cosmetic spoon or amulet. Both belong to the same world. Both were once handled by human beings. There is something restful in that proximity, as if the mind is being taught to appreciate scale without losing tenderness. The same is true of papyrus, one of Egypt's most enduring gifts to the world. Papyrus documents can contain contracts, letters, prayers, tax records, recipes, and literary texts. They remind us that the past was written not only in stone, but in fragile fibers. A civilization that carved into rock also wrote on reeds and rolled those writings into portable form. The contrast is lovely. Permanence and impermanence existed side by side. What was meant to last might endure in stone, while what was meant to be used daily survived in boxes, caches, and desert dryness. Even now, the survival of papyrus feels slightly miraculous. A few dry conditions, a sealed jar, a forgotten chamber, and a voice returns across thousands of years. Among those voices are hymns and wisdom texts, love poems and instruction literature, letters from families separated by work or duty, and records of legal disputes. The human range is broad. Ancient Egypt was not one mood but many. There were moments of splendor, grief, humor, bureaucratic irritation, domestic affection, devotion, and practical calculation. In this respect, the surviving writings make the civilization feel near at hand. They narrow the distance. The people behind the monuments become recognizable as people, not abstractions. Some of the most endearing remnants are the small votive objects left at shrines and temples. A figurine, a fragment of offering bread, a scarab, a pot, a little statue carved in haste or care. Such objects can tell us that faith was often intimate. Not every act of worship was grand. Many were quiet, repetitive, and personal. A traveler might leave an offering for safe passage. A family might dedicate a prayer for healing. A worker might hope for protection on a difficult journey. The accumulation of these small gestures over centuries gives ancient sites a feeling of human weather. They are not merely stones. They are places where people repeatedly brought hopes and losses. And so the legendary places of Egypt gradually become less like isolated landmarks and more like a network of resting points in the imagination. One can move from the solar theology of Heliopolis to the river sanctity of Elephantine, from the royal sanctuaries of Thebes to the pilgrimage of Abydos, from the hidden harbour worlds of the Mediterranean to the oases of the Western Desert, from the mines of Sinai to the eternal hush of the necropolis. Each place has its own tone. Each one contributes a different shade to the whole. Some are bright, some shadowed, some lost, some carefully reconstructed. All of them together form an immense historical atmosphere. If there is a single emotion that belongs to these places, it may be reverence without haste. Not a reverence that demands certainty, but one that can live with fragments and distance. The ancient Egyptians themselves, in their many eras, seemed deeply attentive to continuity. They built for gods, for kings, for ancestors, and for the unseen journey beyond death. They also built for the practical needs of the present. Their world was both spiritual and administrative, poetic and exact. That balance, perhaps, is part of why their places continue to fascinate. They are not one-dimensional ruins, they are living compositions of purpose. In the end, though, the most lasting image may be the simplest one, a river in the dark. The Nile has carried Egypt through every age. Cities have risen and shifted along it. Temples have watched it. Boats have crossed it. Fields have depended on it. Tombs have been cut into the cliffs above it. Legends have gathered around it like evening mist. If one listens to the long history of Egypt without strain, the river seems to speak in a low, steady voice, repeating the same broad themes across centuries. Return, nourishment, passage, memory, endurance. And now, as those themes soften and drift apart, the places themselves can begin to recede into a calmer distance. The pyramids can stand under their ancient light. The temples can keep their quiet shadows. The oases can remain green in the mind. The buried cities can sleep beneath the earth. The lost harbors can rest beneath the water. The tombs can hold their colors in patient dark. The museums can keep their objects in gentle lamplight. And the river can continue on unhurried as it has always done. So let Egypt become only an afterimage now, a field of sand and stone and water slowly fading into night. Let the legendary names grow soft at the edges. Let the unknown remain peacefully unknown. Let the oldest walls rest. Let the painted stars stay fixed on their ceilings. Let the scent of papyrus, river silt, and warm stone imagine itself and then dissolve. There is no need to search farther. The land has already offered enough. And as sleep deepens, it may feel as though one is moving quietly downstream, past temples and tombs, past islands and deserts, past cities that still remember their own names. Everything is becoming still now. Everything is settling. Everything ancient is keeping watch in the dark, while the mind grows lighter, slower, and ready to rest.